Hello, this is Mr. Sumpter with your Algebra Lesson 5.7. Today we're going to talk about slope-intercept form. Get this down here a little bit so you can see it better. Slope-intercept form, very important to know this form for functions and to draw lines and graph lines and make equations. Simply put, the equation is y equals mx plus b. The m represents the slope of the line and the b represents the y-intercept. The x and the y are just generic x and y. That would be any point that's represented on the line. With this format, there's several things that we can do. The first thing that we can do is, if it's in this format and we know the slope and the y-intercept, we can graph. We can use that to graph. So, how can we graph? The first step is to graph. You graph the y-intercept. To graph a line, you need 2 points. So any 2 points, we can make a line. And so here's 1 point, the y-intercept. So we're going to plot the y-intercept, and then using the y-intercept, we're going to use the slope, which is rise over run, to find the second point. Once we know the second point, we can just connect the dots and make our line. So for instance, this first one here, these first two actually, I just went ahead and wrote down their slope and the y-intercept. It's not actually in the equation, but you should be able to get that information from the equation as well. So if you see that the slope is 1/3 and the y-intercept is -3, again, the first step, graph the y-intercept. So y-intercept is -3. I always like to make a little extra line here so you know where the origin is, and -3 on the y would be right there. Since the slope is 1/3, 1/3 is rise over run, so that's up 1, right 3. Always go right. Okay, it does help a lot if you always go right. If there's a negative, assign it to the rise. So a negative means you go down, a positive means it goes up, and then you always go run to the right. So up 1, from this point, I'm going to up 1, rise, and go right 3. 1, 2, 3, make the dot. You could keep going up 1, 1, 2, 3 to the right. Either way, there's our first line right there, for example number 1. Example number 2, the y-intercept's at 3.5, so I'm going to have to estimate that. There's 1, 2, 3.5 would be right here in the middle. The slope is 0.5. Now that doesn't help us too much in terms of rise over run, but think about converting that to a fraction. That would be 1/2. And so therefore I'm going to rise 1 and then go right 2. So from this point, go up 1. Keep in mind I'm going up to 4.5, and then right 2. 1, 2, and there would be the second point on that line. And again, just connect the dots, make your line, your arrow, and this would be example number 2. So that's how you can use the slope and the y-intercept to graph. To write an equation for slope-intercept form, I always like to say it's not a trick question. What 2 things do you need to write slope-intercept form? You must have the slope, which is represented by m, and you must have the y-intercept, which is b. You have to have the slope and the y-intercept to write it in slope-intercept form. Makes sense. Sometimes they just give them to you, and that's nice. You just plug them in. If they don't give you b, if they do not give you the y-intercept, then you need to plug in your x and y and your m into the equation and solve for b. We'll get to that one in a moment. That one's a little more tricky. Let's take a look at these first ones. The directions just say to write the equation slope-intercept form. Here's my slope. Here's my y-intercept. Y equals 8x plus 2. Done. That's it. Just plug them in. You're done. Nothing else. The next one, slope of 0, y-intercept of -3. So y equals 0x minus 3. Of course, you don't need the 0 and the x because that would just be 0 because they times and we make it go away. So y equals -3. Just simplify that and we are done. Now the next one's a little trickier because again on this one, number 8, it does not have the y-intercept. It gives us the slope as 5 and it gives us a point on the line as 2, 7. Okay, 2, 7. So if you think about your slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b, I have the slope 5, so I can plug that in. I have my x right here. This is an x and this is a y. I have my x of 2. I have my y of 7. And I can use that same equation to find my b. So go ahead and simplify that. 10, 7 equals 10 plus b, subtract 10 to both sides, and so b equals 7 minus 10, which is negative 3. So I'm not done, that's not my final answer, but that gives me the next thing I need to write this in slope-intercept form. They already gave me my slope. I just found my y-intercept of negative 3, so to put this in slope-intercept form, y equals 5x minus 3. Remember that negative goes with the 3, so that would be a minus 3 in that case. And we're done. Okay, so that's writing the equation. The last thing is either finding the intercepts, the y-intercept and the slope, or graphing. And in these equations, you don't always have it solved for y. So to convert equation to slope-intercept, remember the first thing you need to do is solve for y. We did this lesson prior where we had to solve for a particular variable. Same thing here. We're solving for y on these problems, and then make sure you reduce. So this first example, 3x minus y equals 1. I would have to subtract 3x to both sides first. And so I get a negative y equals negative 3x plus 1. So again, I always want to get the y by itself. I can't figure out the slope unless the y is by itself. I can't figure out the y-intercept unless the y is by itself. So I want to solve for y first, and I did put the negative 3x first. I could have put 1 minus 3x, but because x goes first in our format, that's what I usually go with. To get rid of that negative, I'm just going to multiply everything by negative 1. You could divide everything by negative 1. Essentially, we're just making everything opposite. So it becomes y equals 3x minus 1. And that's all I would need you to do for this question. Now, if the directions said to graph this, I would have my y-intercept at negative 1, plot that point. My slope would be 3, or 3 over 1. And so from the negative 1, then I would go up 3, right 1, and plot the point and graph it. So you can do that as well. On number 12 here, just a one-step equation. Just subtract 2x to both sides, and you get y equals negative 2x plus 4. One thing I want to point out and remind you also is if there was a number in front of this y, like a 2 or a 3, we would have to make sure we divide everything. So if there was a 2 in front of that, we would have to divide the 2x by that and the 4 by that. You'd have to divide everything by that. So don't forget that as well when you're simplifying these equations. But otherwise, again, you could use this information, get it in slope-intercept form. Now you have your y-intercept, you have your slope, and just like we did on the first page, you can go ahead and graph your point. Again, as usual with the e-learning day, you can always ask me questions on email. I'll try to respond as quickly as possible. On a normal day, within a half an hour. On a school day, like a trial run or mock e-learning day, I'll probably be able to get back to you right away, but just keep that in mind. You can also look at the videos online for the textbook if you need more instruction or more examples. Those are very good instructional tools as well. Also, I have the notes. These notes will be posted online too, so that you can double check if there's something you missed. So hope that helps, and we'll see you later.